a young girl set out to run an errand for her mother. As the minutes ticked by, it became clear she did not simply wander off. With no clues to her whereabouts, local authorities called in the FBI to help. Vicki Lynn Hoskinson was going only a few blocks, but the search for her would spread to 3 states.
Every parent faces the question, when is a child old enough to leave the house alone? For mother in Tucson, her 8-year-old daughter's bike ride to the corner mailbox turned into a 2-month nightmare. Under the federal kidnapping statute, the FBI can enter a case after 24 hours. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It would take dozens of agents working in 2 states to track down a paroled sex offender. But it would take a mother's courage to change the laws that released a monster.
Monday, September 17th, 1984. At around 3 in the afternoon in Flowing Wells, Arizona, outside Tucson, 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, just home from school, was helping her mom send a belated birthday card to her aunt. Because her big sister was staying late at school for track practice, Vicki asked her mom if she could mail the card by herself. The mailbox was little more than 2 blocks away. After telling her daughter to be back before 3:30, Debbie Carlson gave her consent to her elated youngest daughter. According to Mrs. Carlson, the trip to the mailbox and back would take less than 10 minutes.
I sent Vicki by herself, which was the first time I'd ever sent any one of my children by themselves to run an errand. We always used the buddy system.
Little Vicki Lynn Hoskinson was on her first big solo adventure. According to her mother, she beamed with pride over the responsibility she had been given. She promised to come right home after mailing the card. About 20 minutes after Vicki left, Debbie Carlson was reassured by the sound of the front door.
Stephanie?
And a little surprised to see that it was Vicki's older sister, Stephanie.
Do me a favor, go look for your sister.
Her track practice had been canceled.
Vicki went down to the mailbox.
Mrs. Carlson told her that Vicki went out to mail a letter but hadn't returned. Stephanie thought her sister might be playing with a friend.
Stephanie goes, oh, I'll go look for her. She probably stopped at Jennifer's house. So Stephanie, the second time in one day, I sent one of my kids without the buddy system.
Stephanie found Vicki's bike lying on the side of the road.
Vicki!
She called her little sister's name.
Vicki!
She hurried home to tell her mom.
Well, right away, that was an antenna for me because Vicki would have never left her bike in the middle of the street. That was her pride and joy. She took care of that bike like it was, a prized possession.
Debbie Carlson drove to the spot with her daughter to collect Vicki's bike.
Vicki!
Stephanie checked the house nearby to see if anyone had seen her little sister. No one answered. Shortly after loading Vicki's abandoned bike into the car, Mrs. Carlson was overwhelmed by emotion.
I was on my way back home. I just uncontrollably started crying. It was like I knew something was wrong. It just was so out of character, something was wrong.
All right, when's the last time you seen your dog?
Mrs. Carlson called the Pima County Sheriff's Office. She also called Mr. Carlson home from work. The little girl had been missing less than 90 minutes, but concern within the community grew quickly.
Everybody's reaction was the same, that there was something wrong. There was something not right with the situation.
Debbie Carlson provided photos of Vicki to deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Police retraced her route to see where she might have encountered trouble. Her destination was the mailbox in front of a convenience store near a busy intersection, only a few blocks away from her home.
Yes, sir. How you doing? Tom Kernan.
A deputy asked the manager if he'd seen the
Have you
8-year-old.
seen this girl? Have you seen her? Do you recognize her?
The manager recognized her from previous visits, but hadn't seen her that day.
Have you seen her in the last, say, hour or 2 hours?
Deputies also canvassed the surrounding neighborhood. They checked first at her best friend's house. Mrs. Spencer said that neither she nor her daughter had seen Vicki that day. Then her 5-year-old son spoke up.
Have you seen Vicki?
He said Vicki had stopped by earlier looking for Jennifer.
Hey, is Jennifer home?
After he told her she wasn't home, Vicki rode off toward her house, apparently having already mailed the card.
There?
Did you see her by the bike path?
As the little boy finished his story, 2 older boys approached the deputy. They said they'd also seen Vicki riding away from the convenience store. Just minutes before they rode past her, they saw a small black car with California plates. It was moving so slowly they passed it on their bikes. They said it was heading in Vicki's direction, but they didn't wait to see if it passed her. And they never noticed the driver. A slow-moving out-of-state car, appearing at around the same time Vicki vanished, struck the investigators as suspicious. Although it simply may have been someone's guest looking for a house number, the sheriff had to consider the possibility that the little girl could have been abducted. Authorities take a case like this very seriously. They've learned to expect and brace for the worst. The sheriff called in homicide detective Gary Damers.
The sheriff decided that it was important to have the homicide detail handle this particular case because of the disappearance of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. It was felt that she had been abducted and that we were looking at a case that could eventually become a homicide case. So we were called out a little earlier than usual.
A few hours later, a command center was set up at the nearby elementary school, which was closed for the day. It became the clearinghouse for any information, any leads. As word of Vicki's disappearance spread, there was no trouble finding volunteers to man the phones.
That's correct.
The calls poured
Along
in.
with that, we would like to get some amplified.
Sheriff's deputies, along with hundreds of volunteers, organized a search of the area. They systematically moved out in concentric circles from Vicki's last known sighting. They combed the fields for some sign of the girl. But none was found. Even the dogs couldn't pick up her scent.
You know, before you know it, the minutes turned into half hour into hour, and more law enforcement, more deputies started coming. people within the neighborhood started coming over, and everybody started looking for Vicky.
A deputy remained at the house should new information come available or a ransom call be made. Hours passed with no word.
Doing everything possible
The only calls were from concerned friends and family.
No, they don't know.
In terms of news, there was still nothing.
Okay,
Still,
thank you.
no Vicky.
to get the information.
Under the federal kidnapping statute, the Pima County Sheriff's Department was empowered to ask the FBI to enter the case. On day 2 of Vicky's disappearance, Special Agent Larry Bagley from the FBI's Tucson field office took the assignment.
The evidence was simply that a young child who was very responsible left home, and her bicycle is found in the middle of the street, and she never returned home. And that was enough to trigger our entry under the kidnapping statute.
In the case of a missing child, chances for a safe return increase when immediate action is taken. The FBI had the power to extend the investigation beyond the state of Arizona if necessary. The agent's participation gave Debbie Carlson hope for a quick resolution. A few blocks away at the command center in the elementary school, deputies and volunteers continued to work the phones. By now, it seemed that all of Tucson knew about the disappearance of the 4-foot-tall, 60-pound girl with auburn hair. And it seemed like everyone was calling.
Okay, thank you.
Some were pranksters,
Man,
some merely misinformed.
Okay.
All had to be answered, filtered, and processed. Finally, among the dozens of hopeful but futile tips and leads, one call held a glimmer of hope. A woman called to report that she thought she saw Vicki Lynn Hoskinson at the mall the previous evening.
Hi, can I please
She was a
speak to
clerk at a
detective?
toy store.
No, I
She
want
told
this.
authorities that a woman in a wide-brimmed hat came in with an upset little girl who looked like Vicki Lynn to her.
Gonna get the bunny?
The woman tried to placate the child with a toy.
$15?
She paid cash for the purchase, pulling it out of an envelope.
You know,
The clerk also noticed that she carried a shopping bag from another store in the mall.
I want to eat.
After paying, the two left, arguing over what to have for dinner. The clerk agreed to come to the command center to provide a sketch. From her description, a police artist created a composite drawing of the customer.
What about her nose?
It was their first real lead. From the way the woman was described treating the girl, investigators believe she may have lost a child and was trying
We'll get
desperately
copies
to
of it.
replace it
Thank
with
you
someone
very much.
else's. While it was reassuring to think that Vicki was being cared for by her abductor, the theory had some nagging inconsistencies for Agent Bagley.
It was pretty unlikely to me that someone would have taken Vicki Lynn and then taken her to a public place and to be seen with her. That and the fact that Debbie said that Vicki Lynn would never knowingly accompany a stranger in public and not try to get away.
But perhaps Vicki did not run from the woman because she was not a stranger to the child. Investigators returned to Vicki's neighborhood, hoping that someone would recognize the sketch and provide a name.
Give me a call. I sure will.
They found no one who could.
Sure will. Yeah, thank you. You guys have a good day.
A number of leads that identified, or people believe they identified this woman, were telephoned into the command post, and each one of those leads were followed up by an investigator or a detective.
Ma'am? Excuse me.
Investigators canvassed the mall,
I'm,
including
if
the
I
store
give me
whose
ID
shopping
baggage.
bag the woman had carried.
And, this is Officer Nolan from the Sheriff's Department. What did this sketch...
The clerk there
that we
recognized the
believe was in
woman,
here.
remembering that a little girl
Been
was with
the
her,
little girl.
and even commenting that the woman had worn a wide-brimmed hat which wasn't included in the sketch. As new witnesses came forward, all of Tucson held its breath with the hope that Vicki Lynn Hoskinson would be found alive. By the second day of the search for 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, the news coverage was extensive. Local and national news teams broadcast hourly updates. Though Vicki was reportedly seen in the Tucson Mall the night before, arguing with a strange woman, it seemed implausible to agents and deputies that if Vicki were still alive, her abductor would have taken her to a public place. Investigators continued to search in nearby rural areas. They also continued to prepare themselves and Vicki's mother, Debbie Carlson, for the worst.
I remember them coming in and the second day on Tuesday and wanting access to Vicki's room. You know, they made us close up her room and they started taking hair samples from her bed. They took her sheets, they took her pillow, they took her hairbrush. They took all these things, and I was like, you know, they were preparing a homicide case, is basically was what they were doing. And I was not real receptive to that, you know, because in my mind, this was not going to be a homicide case.
Please? Thank you.
Despite their doubts, investigators continued to pursue their only lead. They needed to identify the woman in the mall whom a witness believed had abducted Vicki.
We're gonna go get something to eat.
At the nearby high school, a student thought he recognized the woman's face. He said he saw the woman with the little girl in a dark-colored car the previous afternoon. He recalled the car was a black Monte Carlo. A little girl who resembled Vicki was looking out of the window. He believed that the woman driving was the same one depicted in the sketch. Investigators wondered if it was the same car seen earlier in the neighborhood by the two boys on the bikes.
Okay.
The Monte Carlo that was seen was a lead for us because it sounded like it had a great deal of potential, but there wasn't much we could do with it. We did look for Monte Carlos and had got no hits with that.
At the command center, witnesses of all ages were coming forward. A mother came in with her 3-year-old.
Couldn't have been more.
She helped her son describe to investigators what he had seen the day before. They lived across the street from where Vicki Lynn's bike was found. Earlier that afternoon, she told the detective her son was playing in the front yard. While she went into the house for just a moment, the boy said he saw a little girl on a pink bike being knocked down by what he called a black race car. He said a big girl with long hair got out of the car and helped the little girl in. Then they drove off. This little boy had apparently witnessed the abduction of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. His portrayal of events rekindled suspicions that Vicki may have been abducted by the woman from the mall. But he was too young to give any more useful details. And his mother hadn't seen or heard anything. Agents checked the spot where Vicky Lynn's bike had been found to see if anything had been overlooked. Agent Bagley made a crucial find. Something that hadn't been reported earlier.
There was a fresh gouge on the post about 16 or 18 inches above the ground, which was not the contact point for a large car. So it looked to me like it was fresh. It certainly appeared to me that perhaps the car that had hit the bicycle had run into this post.
He surmised that the small black car with California plates spotted just yards away could have been the car that struck the post at that height.
There's no evidence of
The agent asked if any other investigators had received reports of a black out-of-state car in the area.
witnesses. I interviewed 2 young fellows.
One detective had. Earlier that day, he had taken a statement from Sam Hall, the coach at the elementary school.
What I have done.
Hall reported seeing a suspicious vehicle at the schoolyard at about 3 o'clock on September 17th, just 20 minutes before Vicky was last seen in the neighborhood. He said he first noticed a low black car with California tags, driving slowly near the schoolyard. Then he noticed that the driver was watching the children at play. He described the driver as male, with long hair and a beard. Hall told Detective Damers that when he looked at the stranger's face, a chill went up and down his spine.
He described it as his hair raising on the back of his neck when he saw this individual. So he kept a close eye on this subject.
As the man began to drive off, Hall had the presence of mind to jot down his license number. The next day, when the gym teacher had heard that Vicky Lynn Hoskinson was missing, he believed that his sighting might be relevant.
When we obtained the license number from Sam Hall and heard his story, it got me pretty excited because this was probably the break we were looking for.
It would take several hours for the FBI to trace the license number to the car's owner. Investigators were uncertain if there was any connection between the strange woman at the mall and the bearded man in the car.
Each investigator in this case was highly charged with emotion because every hour that passes makes the likelihood that Vicky Lynn would be recovered safely, it diminished with every hour.
Time conspired against them, and hope for Vicky Lynn's safe return began to falter as day 2 came to a close. September 19th, 1984. Day 3 in the hunt for Vicky Lynn Hoskinson. While the license plate for the small black car was being traced, investigators continued collecting statements from potential witnesses. Another neighborhood woman came in to describe how her child was almost abducted. The woman told investigators that she'd been doing laundry in her apartment building. While she was busy with the machine, a woman came in and tried to lure her child away. The mother managed to drive her off.
Leave us alone.
Sketch right here.
Police showed the witness their sketch of the woman from the shopping mall.
Was this the lady?
No.
Is that her?
The drawing did not look like the woman who grabbed her boy,
She was a little
but the mother couldn't be sure.
That's
Police canvassed the area and found the woman in question. She was a fixture in the neighborhood, eccentric but ultimately harmless.
Have you ever seen this
She was released. Another one of 200 or so dead ends that investigators pursued. Each one meant dashed hopes. Late that afternoon, Mrs. Carlson held a press conference with her family. She pleaded for Vicky's safe return. By reaching out to millions of people through the evening news, she hoped someone would come forward with information on her young daughter's whereabouts.
One minute I had hope they were going to find her, and the next minute I was waiting for them to walk through the door and tell me they found her body. And it was a roller coaster. It's like, am I going to be having a funeral in 3 days? Am I going to have my daughter in my arms in 3 days? Is she going to be one of those missing kids that is missing forever?
The FBI was inching closer to the answer. The trace on the license plate led to a 28-year-old Los Angeles man named Frank Jarvis Atwood. Agents gave the information to the FBI Identification Division to check for priors.
About 10 o'clock that evening, we received by fax a rap sheet from the Identification Division, and that about blew our mind because we noticed that there was a prior conviction for child molestation and another for kidnapping.
Frank Atwood was currently out on parole in California. Arizona FBI alerted agents there. They decided not to tell the Carlsons until they knew more. The following morning, day 4 in the case of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, agents went to the LA address where Atwood's vehicle was registered. It was the home of Atwood's parents, retired Army Brigadier General Frank Atwood Sr. and his wife.
Who's Atwood? Mr. Atwood, I'd like to ask you.
The Atwoods acknowledged that their son had committed crimes in the past. They also told investigators that he had visited a few days earlier, but they didn't know where he was now. Agents told them that he might be involved in the kidnapping of a child, and time was of the essence.
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna give you my business card.
Neither parent had any information to share.
Leave it right here on the table. If he does get in contact with either one of
Agents left their business cards in case the Atwoods learned anything new.
The mother was very protective of him, and the father listened to the pleas that perhaps if we acted soon enough, that perhaps Vicki Lynn might be recovered alive.
A few hours after the agents left, the Atwoods received a call.
Where are you?
Mom?
It was their son, Frank. He needed their help.
Everything's all right.
He said his car had broken down in Texas and he needed money wired to him so he could get it fixed.
Yeah.
His mother took down the address and told him not to worry. His father copied it and left the house.
I need to tell you that my son
He went to a payphone and called the FBI.
at Chuck's garage.
He gave them the address of the garage in Kerrville, Texas, where his son Frank and a friend awaited money for a new transmission.
Command Center.
The California office called agents in Arizona, who in turn called agents in Texas with a request to apprehend Frank Atwood. The Texas Bureau called the garage.
Yeah.
The manager confirmed that Atwood was there with one other man. He didn't see anyone else with them. He did not know if Atwood was armed. Agents asked him to stall the fugitive until an arrest team arrived. The wheels were set in motion for the arrest of Frank Atwood. There was one more call that Agent Bagley wasn't sure he should make.
The problem is whether or not to let the parents know that we have a good lead on this. It's breaking extremely fast. We're worried about whether Vicki Lynn is with him in that car, and all sorts of things go through your mind.
Ultimately, they decided to inform the Carlsons of this sudden turnabout in the case of their missing daughter. The story was too big to keep under wraps for much longer.
They came over before the arrest was made, and they briefed us that they were about to make an arrest in another state. And it was going to be on the TV, and basically they briefed us on the situation, who they were going to be arresting. There was no signs of Vicki. They had him under surveillance.
Without any idea about where the little girl might be, or even if she were still alive, federal agents moved in to arrest Frank Atwood for kidnapping.
Stay out of here, sir.
4 days after Vicki Lynn Hoskinson disappeared from Arizona, the FBI made an arrest in Kerrville, Texas. Frank Atwood and his traveling companion James McDonald were picked up without incident at an auto repair garage and held for suspected kidnapping. There was no sign of Vicki. Gary Damers of the Tucson Sheriff's Department headed to Texas to interrogate him.
He told us that he would speak to us about certain things, and there are certain things that he would not speak to us about. Some of the information that he provided was that he, in fact, was in the Tucson area.
On Romero Street.
Atwood's history of child molesting and kidnapping made him a likely suspect in the case.
Here's the city.
Atwood admitted to being in Vicki's neighborhood on Monday, September 17th, the day she disappeared. He said he'd been staying in a nearby park. At about 3 o'clock, he left to buy drugs and returned to the park 2 hours later, around 5 p.m. He wouldn't account for his whereabouts during those 2 lost hours. He claimed he was not responsible for Vicki's disappearance. James McDonald corroborated Atwood's story. On the day in question, he told investigators that he and Atwood had had an argument in the park at about 3 o'clock. Just after that, Atwood left in his car for about 2 hours. McDonald said that when Atwood returned around 5 o'clock, he had blood on his hands and clothing. Atwood told him he'd gotten into a fight with a drug dealer and stabbed him.
Get anything off him?
McDonald also gave authorities the names of other people in Tucson that he and Atwood hung around with. Most were transients. Officially, focus shifted away from the mysterious woman at the mall and centered on Atwood. But Debbie Carlson didn't want to entirely give up on the mall lady theory.
At first, I really wanted to stick to that theory, that it was probably a woman possibly who'd lost a child, was trying to replace the child. And I think that's what kept me going that first week, was that possibly it was it would be someone who would be taking care of her.
Though Mrs. Carlson held out hope, investigators were less optimistic about a happy ending.
Hey, Mom, I love you.
I love you too.
When he was arrested and she wasn't with him, the reality really started to set in, that those last words, "I love you," were the last words that I was going to hear my daughter say to me.
While the FBI scrambled for a warrant to search Atwood's car, agents and Arizona authorities returned to Tucson the next day to track down the other park dwellers mentioned by McDonald. Investigators found 2 men who said that Atwood had spent a few nights in their trailer. One of the men, known as Mad Dog, recalled seeing him there Monday night, the night of Vicky's disappearance. His story supported what Atwood's traveling companion Jim McDonald told the FBI.
McDonald said that he had observed Atwood on Monday afternoon with bloody clothes and blood on his knife and on his boots. Mad Dog said the same thing separately, that he had observed the same thing at his trailer, and that they had even discussed that Atwood should get rid of his bloody clothes and the knife.
Agents presented a warrant and searched the trailer for any evidence that might suggest kidnapping or murder. Initially, it looked as if the search proved fruitful. They collected a blanket that appeared to be blood-stained, along with a hairbrush believed to be Atwood's. Both were subjected to a battery of blood and fiber tests. Both revealed nothing. Atwood's clothes and knife were never found. The search continued, both for evidence against Atwood and for some trace of the victim.
FBI agents and detectives, including myself, continued to search for Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. There was a certain amount of frustration that had set in because we were unable to locate her. The area is vast. It's a lot of desert, and trying to use all the investigative skills available, we had been unable to locate her. But we continued to pursue any type of lead.
Though clues to Vicky's whereabouts were scarce, detectives continued to canvass the park where Atwood had spent most of his time while in Tucson. Agents found a couple who knew Frank Atwood. They also claimed to have seen the suspect in blood-stained clothes the day Vicki disappeared. Like the others, Atwood told them that he had stabbed a double-crossing drug dealer. While that was certainly possible, the timing of the knifing, exactly at the time of Vicky's disappearance, seemed to stretch coincidence. Though investigators now had corroborating stories that suggested Atwood's guilt, they still had no physical evidence and no body. To prove that Vicki had been in his car, they needed to match some hair or fiber from the car with ones collected from the victim's bedroom. It didn't turn out that way.
We didn't get a hair or fibers or blood that we could identify. During that time, and even at this time, the best forensic experts in the country were at the FBI, and they were the ones that processed the vehicle. So I truly believe that if there was something in there that could have been found, it would have been found.
What agents were looking for wasn't inside the car, but rather outside it. FBI examiners lifted a sample of paint from Vicky's bike to compare to a speck of pink paint found on Atwood's front bumper. The paint speck, just a few millimeters wide, was tested at the FBI's Materials Analysis Unit. The examiner first assigned the case passed away shortly after completing the tests. Former Special Agent Examiner James Corby would re-examine the minute evidence.
Usually, the victim of a crime, you have no association with the victim or the family, and we work so many of those cases that you try not to get involved, but it's very, very difficult when a crime involves a baby or a small child, somebody that's defenseless, and you find yourself, I think, working harder to try to establish something in the case. But if it's not there, I mean, it's not there. But you certainly, I think, take a more critical look at that case, and I think it's human nature.
In microscopic and chemical tests, Corby determined the bicycle's paint and the paint found on the bumper matched. Corby also found chrome plating from the bumper smeared on the bike.
So what we have here is an interchange of materials. The paint from the victim's bicycle was on the suspect's car. The plating from the suspect's car is on the victim's bicycle. And this interchange of materials establishes contact between the bicycle and the suspect's vehicle.
It was good, but without a body, it would not be enough to charge Frank Atwood Jr. with the murder of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. Authorities braced themselves for a difficult case with few witnesses, few visible clues, and no body. The case against Atwood could easily slip through any one of those cracks. Almost 3 weeks after little Vicki Lynn Hoskinson disappeared off a street in her Tucson neighborhood, Frank Atwood Jr. was arrested in Texas and charged with kidnapping. Vicki was still missing and presumed dead. Investigators knew that if her body was not recovered, prosecution for murder would be next to impossible. The Tucson community, living this nightmare day by day, soon learned that Atwood had slipped through the cracks before. Atwood was currently on parole after serving 3 years of a 5-year sentence after a child molestation charge involving a 7-year-old boy was plea bargained down to abduction. The enraged citizens of Tucson marched in the streets behind Vicki's family to protest lenient laws against convicted child molesters. Most wore yellow ribbons to show their faith in Vicki's safe return. Atwood fought extradition from Texas to Arizona. With no evidence that Vicki had been taken across state lines, the FBI dropped its federal charges against Frank Atwood. But state charges of kidnapping still held. In November, more than a month since Vicki's disappearance, Atwood returned to Arizona under heavy guard to stand trial for kidnapping. Bail was denied.
And I remember the day that they says, oh, you know, it will take probably at least 6 months. And I'm thinking, 6 months? Get out of here. You're crazy. Little did we know it was going to take almost 3 years.
On December 3rd, 1984, a clean-shaven Frank Jarvis Atwood Jr. pled not guilty at his arraignment. Due to publicity, the judge ordered Atwood's trial to be moved from Tucson to Phoenix. Jury selection would prove long and arduous, taking almost 6 weeks. But the case continued to unfold. On April 12, 1985, a woman walking her dog just off the main road found a small human skull in the desert northwest of Tucson.
We immediately cordoned off the area. The FBI was called in to assist. We systematically worked the area. What had happened was that the body had been scattered. The animals had actually gotten to it and had moved a number of parts around, and we just took our time. I think we were out there for 5 days, collecting everything that we could possibly get out of that area.
About 100 people meticulously scoured a 20 square mile stretch of desert. Investigators photographed the entire area to record the condition of the location. Forensic technicians marked areas where evidence was to be collected. In a case with so little physical evidence, overlooking the smallest bone fragment might prove costly. 12 hours a day for 5 days, authorities recovered and recorded bone fragments, their location, and their condition. Over 20 bags of evidence were delivered to the lab for identification in late May of 1985, including a portion of lower mandible that still held teeth. A witness came forward who testified to seeing Atwood arrive in the area with a child, then leave alone. The coroner found that weathering on the bones was consistent with 8 months' exposure to the elements. Dental records proved these were the remains of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson.
You know, they found the lower mandible and a gopher hole. 1 year later, one of the search and rescue people that searched for her remains had taken a bouquet of flowers and put it in that gopher hole where she found the lower mandible. Vicki Lynn affected a lot of people. These are people who never knew her as the vibrant tomboy little girl that we had. And I don't think anyone who lived here during that time will ever forget how this community came together because of her.
Vicki's family laid her to rest on May 30th, 1985. "500 mourners attended her funeral. The community was outraged that the life of one of its youngest members was cut so short. Debbie Carlson vowed that her daughter's death would have significance for the living.
I became very politically active to help fight for children's issues. And we got a couple laws changed in the state of Arizona. And I think that was my saving grace because it gave me some focus. It gave me a focus away from the pain and the gut wrench and the tearing at my heart that I felt every second to I was doing something positive for Vicki and for other kids. That my daughter was not going to die in vain. She was going to make a difference.
Frank Atwood was indicted for first-degree murder. On March 26, 1987, 2.5 years after Vicki disappeared, he was found guilty. Frank Atwood was sentenced to death. But a case like this is never truly over. 16 years later, memories of hope and despair still linger.
I'll never forget the sound of a helicopter. To this day, when I hear a helicopter, I remember those days. I remember the smell of the air, the time of the year, and the noise of a helicopter.
An armored car vanished during a routine stop. Carrying nearly $1 million, it was supposed to be impenetrable. Investigators didn't know if the driver was involved or if he had been ambushed. FBI agents and local detectives began to suspect a group of former law officers in the heist. It would take determination and high technology to track the robbers and make them pay for their silent strike.
Money may not be the root of all evil, but for some men, $1 million is enough to justify murder. Even men sworn to uphold the law can sometimes be tempted. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When robbery turned to murder, the FBI would discover that a killer might be among them.
The Arrowhead Mall, Glendale, Arizona. November 28, 1994. At 1:30 p.m., a van pulled up outside a department store at the mall. It was an unmarked, fully armored Wells Fargo vehicle. Several companies use these customized vans since they are less conspicuous targets for robbery. Following company protocol, the driver remained inside the van while the courier went to pick up cash from the store. The van was bulletproof, and its doors could not be forced open from the outside. Inside the department store office, the courier exchanged empty bags for those filled with the weekend's receipts. It was the Monday after Thanksgiving. The cash pickup followed the busiest shopping weekend of the year. When the courier returned to the parking lot minutes later, the armored van and the driver were gone. He notified police immediately. The 911 call came to the Glendale, Arizona Police Department. They dispatched units to the scene and sent word to the FBI. The nearest FBI field office is in Phoenix, 20 miles from the mall. Because the money in the van was federally insured, the FBI opened a case. Agents headed out to the scene. Glendale detectives arrived at the mall first. They began interviewing the courier. He said he had been gone only 4 minutes when he discovered the van and his partner, John McGosh, had disappeared. The courier estimated the amount of cash, checks, and coins in the van to be just over $1 million. Detectives interviewed others at the mall. None reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. FBI agents soon arrived from Phoenix. Evidence technicians had processed the area. Where the van had been parked, they found a cigarette butt and a pair of broken eyeglasses. The courier confirmed that his partner was a smoker and said the glasses looked like those McGosh needed when he drove. The technicians collected and marked the items as evidence.
David 44 to David
Detective
41.
Tom Clayton is a senior investigator for the Glendale Police Department.
I think the first thought when we saw the van missing was the driver took off with the money and was going to leave town. We also considered somebody could have robbed him. With the glasses laying there, we weren't sure if it's, is it a setup or did something really happen. We explored every possibility we could think of.
Supervisory Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth, now retired, was the lead for the FBI. The investigators organized a search for the van and its driver, believing that whoever took the van would abandon it soon in favor of a getaway car. They dispatched some officers to begin a ground search around the mall. Pilots from the Arizona Department of Public Safety conducted an aerial search. The DPS officers began at the mall, then widened their search in concentric circles, looking for the van in the surrounding neighborhoods. Whenever they spotted a white van, they radioed ground units to follow up. Special Agent Chenoweth and the others knew most armored car robberies are inside jobs or armed ambushes. Witnesses hadn't heard shooting. Perhaps the driver had decided to trade his hourly wage for $1 million.
Certainly, the van is supposed to be locked and the driver inside, and therefore inaccessible. The fact that the van is missing would lead us to initially at least think about the possibility of the guard driver being involved.
Investigators sought more information on the missing driver.
We investigated John McGosh. First off, we started running his name in the computer to see if we could find any arrests or if he had a criminal history. We started through the Wells Fargo file, his employment file, looking for relatives, friends, where he lived.
After securing a search warrant, investigators traveled to his apartment. His landlady let them in. The investigators were looking for evidence that McGosh had planned the robbery. The apartment appeared undisturbed. Nothing indicated he had planned the robbery or that he was ready to leave town.
Do you know who this is?
Yes, that's Lisa Johnson.
Detectives learned that McGosh had a daughter living nearby in Phoenix.
Live here? All right. Does she live here?
Determining her address through DMV records, they went to interview her.
Police. Detective Myers, Detective Clayton. Can I talk to you for just a moment?
McGosh's daughter described her father as honest and stable. He took his job seriously. Police found others who said the same. McGosh had no criminal record.
Well, right now, your father and your
Detectives began to consider the 61-year-old grandfather not as a suspect, but as a victim.
John McGosh had a good reputation. We talked to family, friends, relatives, co-workers. He was a person that did not have a lot of requirements in life. Money wasn't a big concern. Based on the background we did on him, we didn't believe he was going to be involved in the crime.
With McGosh eliminated as a suspect, the investigators were back to square one. They needed the public's help.
Certainly when you don't have eyewitnesses, you try and put as much information out in the form of press releases, newspaper articles, things of this nature, in hopes that it would reach somebody that maybe saw something that otherwise had not heard about it.
That afternoon, the FBI and Glendale police held a press conference.
I wanted to give you an update on bank heist outside the mall earlier.
They released photos and descriptions of the missing van and driver.
As of yet, we have very little.
Anyone who had seen John McGosh or the Wells Fargo van was asked to contact the FBI.
Investigation without assistance.
A reward of $60,000 was posted for any tip leading to the recovery of the money and the conviction of those involved.
Anyone may know where the van is at this point.
Hours later, a 911 call came in from a church in Sun City, Arizona, just outside Glendale. The caller reported a van idling in the church's parking lot. Parishioners arriving for a Monday night bingo game noticed the van, which fit the description in the news reports. License plates and serial numbers confirmed it was the van missing from the mall. Investigators approached cautiously, not knowing who or what was inside. No one was in the driver's seat, but investigators could see the outline of a body on the floor. They tried to open the van, but the armored vehicle was impenetrable, even to the agents.
The engine was going, it was locked, and a cursory examination initially of the inside disclosed the body lying in the center. In order to gain access to the van, of course, we had to call the armored car company.
No one at the church had seen who left the van or what vehicle they used to get away.
Notice anybody else around?
Checking the body through the window, police could see blood on the chest near a Wells Fargo badge. There was no sign of breathing. Authorities believed John McGosh had been killed during the robbery. There were no bullet marks on the van's exterior, no broken glass, and no sign of forced entry at the doors. Whoever had hit the van knew what they were doing.
An armored car robbery is a pretty sophisticated crime, and it takes a lot of detailed planning. And so we knew after finding the van and finding the body that we were up against probably some people who had thought this out very well, planned it extensively, and certainly would not stop at murder in carrying this out.
Investigators needed to get inside the van to know what happened. On November 28, 1994, the FBI and Glendale, Arizona police investigated an armored van hijacked from a mall and abandoned in a church parking lot in nearby Sun City. The driver, 61-year-old John McGosh, lay dead in the cab. He had been shot once in the head, but his death was not instantaneous. Technicians noted aspirated blood spatter, indicating McGosh had continued breathing after being shot. Technicians lifted many latent prints from money cabinets in the van's interior. These would be compared to known prints of employees. No foreign prints were found. No hairs or fibers pointed toward a suspect either. Inside the van, investigators found $132,000 in coins. The cash and checks, estimated at $920,000, were gone. The details of the crime suggested that there had been several violent criminals, according to Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth.
After looking at the van, We knew that we were probably dealing with certainly more than one person, because this would be very difficult for one person to accomplish. So we knew we were looking probably at least 2 or more, and very vicious and violent people who certainly would not stop at anything in order to obtain their goals, which was the money located inside the van.
To Glendale Detective Tom Clayton, the placement of the van outside Glendale city limits spoke to the criminal's understanding of police procedure.
We believed they dumped the van in Sun City to get it out of our jurisdiction into another one, to complicate the investigation and communication of police agencies, maybe hoping we would not be able to link the two things together right away.
During the autopsy of the armored car driver, the medical examiner retrieved several small bullet fragments from the left side of the victim's head. The fragments were too damaged to determine the make of the murder weapon. It seemed like a small caliber, perhaps a .22. The medical examiner found no powder burns on the victim's head. This meant he had been shot from a distance. Magash's partner said the driver often smoked a cigarette while waiting in the van. Though it was against company policy, he usually opened his door to let the smoke out. Investigators believed the killers knew this and shot him when he opened the door. Because of his experience tracking down elusive criminals, now retired FBI Special Agent Ron Myers was transferred from the Fugitive Task Force to work the case. From the beginning, he knew they were not hunting amateurs.
One of the things they did that made us think that they were professionals was the manner in which they did the robbery. They picked an isolated part of the shopping center where not many people parked, where there wouldn't be many witnesses. They drove through the type of neighborhoods where there weren't many people out during the day, and they picked an empty parking lot of a church that had no one at it during the day.
Go right in here, sir.
Investigators received dozens of calls to their tip line. One witness came forward, claiming to have some information that might be helpful. He said he had seen a white van quickly leaving the mall at the time in question. A red pickup truck followed not far behind, but he wasn't sure if the two vehicles were together. Investigators were frustrated that no one saw the actual ambush at the mall.
We couldn't find any eyewitnesses. And when you don't really know what happened, or you don't have somebody that can tell you what maybe transpired with the van, it's a mystery.
With no other solid leads, investigators canvassed the neighborhoods between the mall and the church. Perhaps someone there had witnessed something. Edward Morgan, a resident of Sun City, recalled that he had seen the van. On the afternoon of November 28th, Mr. Morgan was returning from the post office when he noticed the van.
And Mr. Morgan stopped because he thought they weren't going to stop for the stop sign and was afraid he'd be hit. At that time, he noticed the white van with this red truck shortly behind it, both speeding through the intersection and driving off. And he thought that was kind of unusual, not only the way they were driving, but the way that the red truck seemed to be following the white van.
I think they were doing...
Mr. Morgan couldn't recall details of license plates or the face of the van's passenger. Desperate for a break, investigators wanted to place him under hypnosis to jog his memory. Morgan agreed to travel to Texas with the investigators. There they met with a forensic hypnotist. Perhaps under hypnosis, the witness could remember more details about the incident. Statements made under hypnosis cannot be used in court, but some police agencies find it to be a helpful investigative tool. Under hypnosis, Morgan returned to the events of November 28th. He recalled the white van and the man in the passenger seat. Investigators now believe there were at least 3 people involved in the heist, 2 in the van and 1 in the red truck. When asked about the truck's license plate, Morgan was able to remember a portion.
237. Very good.
It wasn't much, but it gave investigators a start.
We had to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles to run all combinations of those license numbers, and that produced several hundred possible vehicles because Arizona does not have color on their motor vehicle registration. So we knew we were looking for a particular type of truck, but from looking at the motor vehicle registrations, we didn't know what color they were on the registration, which meant we had to do interviews of everybody on the list.
Investigators eventually tracked down hundreds of truck owners. Each was interviewed, but no suspect emerged. With his refreshed memory of the van's passenger, Morgan worked with a police sketch artist. There was no guarantee that the details recalled through hypnosis were accurate, but authorities were ready to try almost anything. The FBI released the drawing to the media.
For nearly a month now, police and FBI have continued looking for suspects in the global armored...
The FBI and Glendale, Arizona police believed 3 men were involved in the robbery homicide. Yet, as the end of 1994 approached, they still didn't have suspects. It began to look like the killers might never be found.
Martha, do you have the TV on?
But the investigators did not know that the suspect in the composite sketch had been recognized.
Can you call me back? Call me back in like 10 minutes.
By December of 1994, a month after the deadly hijacking of an armored car in Glendale, Arizona, the investigation had stalled. Investigators believed at least 3 people pulled off the heist. They had a composite sketch of one and little else. Then, on December 31st, the investigators received a call. A Mesa, Arizona detective had been told that a local woman had information about the crime.
Okay, thanks.
A background check showed that the woman had a suspended license. This would make it easy to bring her in for questioning without arousing suspicions. The FBI asked local law enforcement to pick her up on the suspended license charge. The investigators asked the woman if she knew anything about the armored car robbery in Glendale. She claimed that she didn't have any real information, but she knew someone who did.
We talked on the phone just a few days ago.
Could you write it down?
She told investigators that her friend, Judy Espinoza, had talked to her after the news reports of the robbery.
Looks just like him.
Espinoza suspected that her boyfriend might have been involved.
Are you watching it? Right. Right, they're saying he might be connected with the armored car.
The woman told the investigators where Espinoza worked. The investigators spoke with Espinoza.
Good afternoon, Miss Espinoza.
They asked her about the robbery, reminding her that interfering with a federal investigation was itself a crime. She agreed to answer their questions. She explained that her boyfriend, James Greenham, who went by the nickname Yoda, had asked her what she would do if he held up an armored car and suddenly had a lot of money. She told FBI Special Agent Ron Myers that Greenham sometimes worked as a bounty hunter and was usually broke.
Jim never had a dime, but the day of the robbery, He came home that night, told her he had to kill somebody, and he had plenty of cash on his person. She told us that Jim did his bounty hunting with a guy named Tim Ring, and that she had been over to Tim Ring's house and noticed several new all-terrain vehicles, jet skis, a new motorcycle, and Tim had made a comment about how she'd never know how much money was in that garage.
The information was good, but it was only hearsay. Investigators needed more solid evidence. Espinoza had kept several rolls of coins that Greenham had given her. The wrappers were consistent with those used by merchants on the armored van's route. More than a month after the crime, the investigators finally had names. They looked into the two suspects' backgrounds. FBI Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth was familiar with the name of one of the men. Tim Ring had been used as an informant in other FBI cases.
We had paid him for some information that he had furnished us in the past, and you know, in order for us to get information from informants, you aren't dealing with priests and with you know good people. You're dealing with bad guys out there, and Ring's a bad guy.
And when you're ready, focused, squeeze the trigger.
Tim Ring and James Greenham had worked as prison guards in Phoenix and now worked bounty hunter jobs together.
Front sight or through the crosshairs.
Both had many hours of firearms training.
Any questions? Okay, Joe.
Ring was an expert marksman.
Fire when ready.
Pursuing bounty hunters would be dangerous.
The fact that these suspects had law enforcement training in their background made the case pretty difficult. For one, they would be schooled in surveillance techniques. If they were looking for somebody following them, they'd know what to look for. They'd know what to expect anybody following them to do. So we had to be very cautious when we were following them around.
The FBI and Glendale police began 24-hour ground and air surveillance. They had to be covert.
You know, if they're looking for air surveillance, they're looking up, you know. Well, we're way over here, because we can't see anything if we're right up here. You know? So we're way over here, way over here.
The agents wanted to see how the pair earned money and how much they spent.
At the time that we were following Mr. Greenham and Mr. Ring around, neither one was gainfully employed that we could tell. They had no income coming in from any legitimate sources, yet we observed them spending a lot of money.
Ring overhauled his truck, and Greenham got a new apartment. Both bought motorcycles. Agents tracked their purchases. It seemed the suspects did not exceed a certain level in order to avoid the attention of the Internal Revenue Service.
Okay.
And they always seemed to be careful whenever they spent their money to stay under the $10,000 limit, knowing that if they spent more than that in cash, the expenditure would be reported by the businesses to the IRS.
Investigators continued tailing Ring and Greenham, building a list of associates. They photographed everyone the suspects met. They still didn't know who the third partner was. Glendale detective Tom Clayton hoped surveillance would spot the three meeting somewhere.
We would watch them go to restaurants where they would meet. We would see them go to strip clubs where they met a couple dancers that they knew.
Everywhere they went, the suspects spent a lot of cash, unaware that investigators were watching. Circumstantial evidence linked them to the robbery and homicide. But the FBI and Glendale police still didn't know exactly what had happened and who else was involved. Somehow, the investigators had to get inside the bounty hunter's shadowy world. As the FBI and Glendale, Arizona police continued to investigate a deadly armored car heist, they got a tip from an associate of their two main suspects. Bounty hunter Michael Sanders said that he had cased armored cars with two other men. He believed those men did the Glendale hit without him. Angry at being cut out of the deal, he decided to talk. He gave FBI Special Agent Ron Myers a lead on the third perpetrator.
Sanders came forward to tell us that he thought that Tim Rang and Jim Greenham were involved in this armored car robbery, and that an ex-Phoenix police officer named Fergie, who worked for a camera shop in the Paradise Valley Mall, might be the third man.
Investigators needed to identify Fergie.
So what we're going to do is
they reviewed their case
set up on
photos.
Tonight, try to take some pictures and get a bunch for that guy there too.
Surveillance teams had watched Ring and Greenham meeting with a bearded man who drove a Camaro. The car was registered to William Ferguson. Since Sanders said Fergie was an ex-cop, Glendale detective Tom Clayton checked the personnel records of the Phoenix Police Department.
As we investigated William Ferguson's background, we found he retired at 20 years from the Phoenix Police Department, and his retirement was precipitated by some disciplinary problems.
Investigators began surveillance on Ferguson. They saw that the ex-cop met often with the other suspects and was also spending a lot of cash. Agents believed they had identified the three men responsible for the robbery and murder.
The investigation was affected by the three suspects having law enforcement training because we knew that they were going to cover evidence, and they were also known to have firearms training, which made them dangerous to the surveillance officers.
Detectives and agents needed evidence linking the men to the crime. During surveillance, they began trash pulls, confiscating trash bags from the suspects in the hopes that some clues might surface. FBI technicians examined the trash. In rings, they found several 3x5 index cards. Each card had notes detailing armored car routes. Analysis confirmed the handwriting was Ring's. But investigators needed more. They wanted tapes of the suspects discussing the crime. All three men had keys to James Greenham's apartment. FBI Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth believed they used the apartment as headquarters.
Timothy Ring was married, had a wife, children, and I think the likelihood of discussions occurring in regards to this armored car robbery at his house were somewhat remote, but we felt that they were occurring at Greenham's residence, so that was the impetus for which we decided to go ahead and proceed and place a listening device inside the apartment of Greenham.
Special Agent Myers was part of the team that entered the apartment to place the bug.
When we opened the door to go in, an alarm went off immediately, at which point we shut the door and exited the area. We had to come back at a later time with an expert in alarms. And when we went in the door that time, we learned that it was just a real simple motion detector sitting on top of the refrigerator, and all we had to do was just flip the off switch. It wasn't anything sophisticated at all.
While the team was inside Greenham's apartment, the detective surveilling Tim Ring saw him leave his house. Ring owned a red truck like the one reportedly seen following the van. The detective trailed behind Ring. After a few turns, he realized where the suspect was headed. Agents were still in the apartment. Tim Ring was headed that way. Ring often went to Greenham's place, even when Greenham was out. If he went to the apartment, he would interrupt the planting of the bug.
His license is under suspension. Then run his plate.
The team inside needed more time.
I'll pull him over and hold him until you get her.
The detective called in a uniformed officer to stop Ring for speeding. Anything to delay the suspect.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, officer. What's the problem?
The officer lectured Ring on the dangers of speeding. Detectives wanted to keep him busy while the team finished at the apartment.
Let's go, gang. They're on their way over. Okay, put everything away. Let's get this thing back.
They made it out just before Ring arrived.
Some notices in the rec center.
Investigators also tapped the home and cellular phones of the two other suspects. To get them talking, Supervisory Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth released false information about the case.
We decided to make a press release talking about the investigation, which we thought when they would hear would certainly generate some telephone conversations and other discussions amongst these three suspects. And it did have its desired effect in that they did talk about the information that we released and how accurate they thought it was and whether or not we were on the right trail and whether or not they thought we were getting close to them.
As the suspects talked, the investigators listened.
We didn't get an actual confession where they said, I did the armored car robbery. What we got were several conversations among themselves about different aspects of the case. They would always listen to the news, follow any printed reports or follow any television stories, and as soon as anything would appear on TV, they'd call each other. And they'd make comments like, well, this isn't the way it happened. You know, they'll never find that license plate.
The evidence against the suspects was building.
Man, you seen Judy lately?
But prosecutors wanted more direct statements about the crime before they ordered arrests. Investigators provoked the suspects one more time. A Glendale detective went to James Greenham's apartment when the suspect was out. On the door, he left his business card with the note, Lead 173. Investigators watched Greenham's response to the card. He knew what the note meant. The authorities considered him a lead. Greenham became distraught. He sped away from his apartment, calling Tim Ring on his cell phone. Agents kept watch from an airplane and listened in on the phone taps.
Yeah, Tim, man, listen.
Greenham drove out into the desert before stopping.
Business card in my door.
Look, man, they ain't got nothing on you. Don't worry about it.
Ring tried to calm Greenham down, promising that the authorities had nothing on them.
Don't worry about it.
But Greenham said he was scared.
I can't do this anymore.
He even threatened to commit suicide.
Just don't do something
Finally,
stupid.
Ring talked Greenham down, convincing him the authorities were not onto them.
But if I see one more cop,
Greenham said that if another cop contacted him, he was going to bury the money. It seemed a direct reference to the crime.
Sam 40.
Investigators felt they
Contact on
finally
Unravel
had enough
suspects,
evidence.
Greenway and 6th Avenue. Continuing search northbound.
They sent units to arrest Greenham and Ferguson.
Jim Greenham was arrested by one team. William Ferguson was arrested by another and attempted to resist arrest but was quickly subdued. Tim Ring was lured down to the FBI office on the premise of looking at some photographs because Ring had previously offered to help the FBI try to find who these people were, which we believe was an effort on his part to try and find out what we knew.
The FBI agent who had previously used Ring as an informant called the suspect. Ring agreed to come in. On February 16, 1995, Tim Ring arrived at the Phoenix FBI field office. Undercover agents were waiting for him in the lobby. They believed he would not be armed at the FBI office, but they couldn't be positive. To ensure their safety, they needed to surprise him.
We had two big burly defensive tactics instructors, one of which was a guy with 25 years of martial arts expertise who came up and whopped him in the head and knocked him down like a sack of potatoes before he knew what he was doing.
All three suspects were off the streets. Now investigators needed physical evidence to make sure the prosecutions were successful. On February 16, 1995, after arresting 3 men for an armored car robbery and murder, FBI agents and Glendale, Arizona detectives searched the suspects' residences. At the house of Tim Ring, suspected leader of the three, they found important evidence. Investigators recovered a note marked with the initials F, Y, and T. Each initial had a number beneath.
Like serial numbers from
The numbers added up to the amount of cash taken from the armored car. Agents believed F stood for Fergie, Y for Greenham's nickname Yoda, and T for Tim. It was the worksheet the three used to divide the money. In the garage, investigators found a red pickup truck that resembled the vehicle seen by witness Edward Morgan in Sun City. The license plate number, however, did not match the ones Morgan recalled under forensic hypnosis. Ring kept several weapons and plenty of ammunition at his house. In a duffel bag, agents also recovered $270,000 in cash. Another $64,000 was found at Ferguson's house.
We need to count all of it.
Nearly $600,000 in cash had been stolen. Noting the money spent by the suspects, investigators found that about $100,000 was unaccounted for. The case against the three suspects seemed solid. FBI Special Agent Ron Myers hoped the evidence might get one of them to roll.
We finally got first-hand information about this crime when Jim Greenham decided to cooperate. Jim Greenham was the only one of the three of them that showed any remorse about what they had done, about how they had killed this driver. Jim decided to cooperate. He told us what happened. He told us all the parts that these individuals played in the robbery.
Greenham met with the investigators and explained that the planning started in the fall of 1994.
Ferguson and I just watched when
Tim Ring had the idea to hit an armored car.
I wasn't crazy about the fact that he was going to kill him.
What were you planning on
So they began to case Wells Fargo vehicles. They drove around Glendale, following different trucks and vans on their routes. Then they zeroed in on the van driven by John McGosh, tailing it for days.
They managed to observe this one particular armored car making several stops, and they noticed that every time the messenger would get out to make a delivery, the driver would open the door about 8 inches to smoke and blow the smoke out the side of the door. They observed the driver at several stops, and they noticed this one particular stop on the back side of a shopping center and noticed that he always parked in the same position.
On November 28, 1994, the Monday after Thanksgiving, a day they were sure a lot of money would be in the van, they were ready to strike. James Greenham and William Ferguson waited unnoticed by the store. They watched until the courier was out of sight. As if on schedule, McGosh opened the door to smoke. Tim Ring was parked 50 feet away, a stolen license plate on his truck. The expert marksman had a silencer on his .22 caliber rifle, so no one would hear the shot. He aimed through the opening and fired once. The force must have knocked McGosh's glasses to the ground. With the driver down, the van was unprotected. No one noticed the vehicle speed away. They drove to the church parking lot. It would be empty at that time of day. They transferred the money and checks to the pickup. They knew authorities would be searching for the van. They left most of the coins and went to destroy the checks and other evidence, according to Detective Tom Clayton.
They loaded the money into Tim Ring's truck and drove out in the desert where they separated the money, changed clothes, and burned all the evidence.
Buried the license plate.
Greenham said they buried the burned evidence and stolen license plate in the desert.
And you can take us to where the plates are buried?
Yeah.
Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth wondered if it was the plate witnessed by Edward Morgan.
We went out there and actually found the location and then dug it up and found that the 3 numbers actually on the plate did in fact match those that were given to us by Mr. Morgan. So he was actually right on his information.
James Greenham pled guilty to second-degree murder and armed robbery and is serving 27.5 years. William Ferguson pled guilty to armed robbery and accessory after the fact and is doing 17 years. On December 6, 1996, Tim Ring was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and burglary.
Anytime that you have somebody actually assassinate a driver like this, it's a very heinous crime, and you certainly want to expend all of your resources in an effort to identify the people involved and put them behind bars.
For his crimes, Ring received the death penalty. He currently awaits execution at the Arizona State Prison in Florence. In the fall of 1995, a serial killer was on the loose. Crossing the country, he lured women with his charm and then struck. Each time, he vanished before police could catch him. The FBI and police detectives needed to stop him before another victim met this deadly stranger.
The body of a young woman found burned in a truck launched a manhunt to find her killer. When more bodies began to turn up across the country, the FBI believed the cases were linked. Investigators had a suspect. They just couldn't find him. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would enlist the help of local law enforcement and even long-haul truckers to stop a cross-country killer.
In the early morning hours of September 29, 1995, the Los Angeles Fire Department responded to a vehicle fire at a hospital in Van Nuys. They found a pickup truck burning in the parking lot. When the flames were extinguished, they found human remains. Firemen contacted the Arson and Homicide Division of the Los Angeles Police Department. Homicide detectives responded to the scene and were briefed by uniformed officers already there. They questioned a witness, a nurse who had seen the fire start. She said she had arrived for work before dawn for the early morning shift. In the parking lot, she saw the truck go ablaze. She saw the outline of a figure with long hair run from the truck as the flames erupted. She never saw a face. And she had never seen the truck before. Investigators inspected the vehicle. The pattern of fire damage indicated it had begun in the cab and had burned very quickly. Investigators believed it had been intentionally set. An accelerant had been used, probably gasoline. The body inside appeared to be a female, but it was burned beyond recognition. Some items survived the fire, including a backpack, a camera, and a roll of undeveloped film. Technicians recovered several documents that bore the name Sandra Gallagher. By sunrise, detectives at LAPD's Van Nuys station had run the truck's plates.
Okay, I'll call back.
Through DMV records, Detective Mike Koblenz was able to confirm that Sandra Gallagher owned the truck.
We'd done some work at the office and learned that she was in fact married to an individual, Steve, who lived in the Los Angeles area. We attempted to contact him and made arrangements to interview him at Van Nuys Station.
Detectives suspected it was Sandra in the truck, but identification through dental records would take a few days.
Thank you. I have some things I'd like you to look at. See if you can tell me if they recognize.
Since the body was too damaged to identify, detectives asked Stephen Gallagher to look through the recovered evidence. He said the backpack, camera, and other items were Sandra's. The police department had developed a roll of film that survived the fire.
Wife and somebody.
Stephen identified his wife in the pictures. Most married homicide victims are killed by their husbands.
We were having a few problems. But
Detectives asked Stephen about his relationship with Sandra.
There's a lot of domestic violence, spousal abuse that goes on, so it's just a direction to go to initially. In our case, as it related to Sandra Gallagher, once again, we wanted to eliminate the husband as a suspect and determine a little bit more about our victim, Sandra.
Stephen said he had seen his wife on September 28th, the day before the truck fire.
Exciting's been happening. What about you?
60 hours.
That day, the couple had met for lunch.
My brother may be getting a promotion.
He and Sandra were experiencing marital problems, and they had spent the last couple of nights apart.
He should know, I would say, week after next.
They had talked about reconciling.
Who was that guy I saw at the bar with the other night? The big guy in the leather jacket?
But things were still strained between them.
That's none of your business, okay?
Stephen told detectives he last saw Sandra around 2 p.m., though he heard from his wife later that evening.
We split apart for a bit. Still trying to work things.
He said Sandra called him from a local bar called McRed's.
I know.
She was very excited and told him she had won $1,200 in the lottery.
I was over my brother's.
Since that call, Stephen hadn't heard from his wife and had no idea where she had gone.
There were a few other people.
Detectives had to corroborate his story.
Once he mentioned the bar McRed's, that was our direction. We wanted to get in there, find out who was the bartender, who the owner was, who was there that particular evening, and who could identify some photos of Sandra that we'd gathered from the truck.
LAPD detectives visited the bar. When shown a photo of Sandra Gallagher, the bartender recognized the woman.
What can you tell me about her?
She knew her by her nickname,
Had
Sam.
a lottery ticket. Hey. Guess what?
The bartender confirmed that Sandra had been in the bar on the night of the 28th. She had told everyone about her lottery win.
Yeah.
Some customers overheard the detective's questions and said they had also been in McRed's that evening.
Can you tell me about her when she was in here the other night?
They also remembered Sandra and recalled one man who talked with her that night.
These people in the bar had mentioned to us that they recognized the photographs and they identified the photographs as a female by the name of Sam. This is the name that they knew her by, was Sam. And everybody had mentioned she was with a person by the name of Glenn.
Yeah.
They described Glenn as having long blonde hair and a beard. He'd been coming in regularly for the past few days. That night, he seemed interested in Sandra and talked to her for quite a while.
Okay.
Glenn was friendly and came across as a big spender, buying drinks for Sandra and the others. When the bar closed, Glenn had asked Sandra for a ride home. He said he lived nearby. She agreed to drop him off, and they left together. The customers hadn't seen Glenn since that night.
Yeah, she took him home.
Do you know where he lives?
It was about 5 minutes.
They believed Glenn's last name was Rogers, but they weren't sure. Their description of him matched the one of the man seen fleeing the burning truck.
If you think of anything else, please call me.
Detective Koblenz would check the lead.
Through department sources, we were able to identify Glenn Rogers as a resident in the Van Nuys area. And we were able to obtain photographs of Mr. Rogers. These photographs in the next day or two were shown to various witnesses at the bar in the form of a photo lineup. And Mr. Rogers was identified in this photo lineup as the person being at McRed's with Sandra Gallagher.
Detectives secured a search warrant for Rogers' apartment. It was only a few minutes away from where the truck had been burned.
LAPD, search warrant.
They didn't know if Rogers was inside, perhaps with a weapon. Uniformed officers entered first to clear the apartment. Rogers wasn't there. It looked like Rogers had cleared out in a hurry. Detectives recovered a purse and a woman's wallet. It was empty of cash and held no ID.
No identification.
They also found a woman's earring.
The earring became significant in that her husband, Steve Gallagher, identified that earring as one that he had purchased as a pair for his wife a couple months earlier.
After several days, the coroner made his report. He positively identified the remains from the truck as those of Sandra Gallagher. He determined that she had not burned to death.
We learn in the nose area of our victim there wasn't any presence of evidence of fire, sooting, and so on. That gave us information that because she didn't breathe any of the fire, any of the soot, it gave us an indication that she had died prior to the fire itself.
The mother of three had been killed by manual strangulation. Los Angeles detectives charged Glenn Rogers with Sandra Gallagher's murder and issued a warrant for his arrest. They entered Rogers' name and description into the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, a database that links over 57,000 law enforcement agencies nationwide.
That informs other agencies around the United States that Glenn Rogers, in this case, is in fact wanted in Los Angeles for murder. It would list the agency, Los Angeles Police Department, Van Nuys area, with my name and my phone number. If they have any contact with Glenn Rogers and happen to run him, this warrant would show up in their jurisdiction and he'd be taken into custody.
Detectives sought out anyone who knew Glenn Rogers. They learned he frequented local bars and worked odd jobs, mostly in construction. They visited several job sites, interviewing his friends and co-workers.
Through witnesses and friends, we learned that Glenn did have a temper, and that when he drank, he did become enraged. There was domestic violence involved with former girlfriends. So we knew we were dealing with someone who could become violent, and generally violent when he drank, as it was in our case with Sandra Gallagher.
One of his friends said he hadn't seen Rogers in a while, but promised to contact the police if he heard from him.
Okay.
A few days later, Rogers' friend called. He said Rogers had phoned him from a motel outside Jackson, Mississippi. Local police talked to the motel manager, who told them Rogers' room number.
Police, open up!
The room was empty. The murder suspect was on the run. In the fall of 1995, the search continued for Glenn Rogers. Police believed he fled California after killing a woman there on September 28th. A tip led to a Mississippi motel, but Rogers had disappeared before police arrived. Police issued an APB locally. They hoped someone would spot the suspected killer before he left the area. Days later, on November 3rd, 1995, Jackson, Mississippi detectives responded to a murder. Family members had found Linda Price dead in her bathtub. The 34-year-old single mother had been stabbed repeatedly and her throat had been slashed. Investigators searched the apartment for evidence. Technicians photographed the scene and lifted numerous latent fingerprints. They found no murder weapon. No valuables seemed to be missing. There was no apparent forced entry, and the killer had locked the door when leaving. The details of the crime scene led Jackson homicide detectives to conclude Linda Price had been killed by someone she knew. In the morning, they interviewed her mother. Perhaps she knew the killer as well. She said her daughter had a new boyfriend. His name was Glenn Rogers. A month earlier, on October 3rd, Linda had met Rogers at the Mississippi State Fair where he had been working. He was charming, and Linda fell for him right away.
That's pretty close, huh?
They soon rented an apartment and moved in together. At first, Linda seemed happier than ever, but recently she wondered if she'd made a mistake. She told her mother that Rogers had a bad temper and she feared his mood swings. When Linda stopped calling and didn't answer her apartment door, her mother believed that Rogers had harmed her. Again, Rogers was nowhere to be found. Jackson detectives believed he had left the area. They entered his name into the NCIC database. Learning Rogers was wanted for murder in California, they contacted Detective Mike Koblenz in Los Angeles.
Jackson, Mississippi at that time contacted me, informed me of a murder they had, and they wanted more information on Glenn Rogers as he was a possible perpetrator in that case.
The murders followed a pattern. The victims in California and Mississippi had both been charmed by Rogers. They had been isolated from others, then brutally killed just before Rogers fled the area. The investigators believed that Rogers was on a rampage that probably would not stop until he was found.
In our minds, we knew that we had a major problem going on here. We felt if he wasn't apprehended, that there could very well be more victims.
Jackson police asked the public to call if anyone saw Rogers in the area. Witnesses reported sightings, but Rogers stayed one step ahead of authorities. The detectives contacted the FBI field office in Jackson.
Hey, got together these pictures from the crime scene. I think you're gonna find.
They believed Rogers had left the state like he did after the California killing. Agents filed a federal warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Perhaps federal resources could help stop the killer. FBI Special Agent John Huber helped coordinate the multi-state investigation.
This case was very high speed, very fast. The murder he committed in Jackson was on November 3rd, it was Linda Price. Subsequent to that, he committed another murder on November 6th.
On that date, police in Tampa, Florida responded to a murder scene at a local motel room that had been rented by Glenn Rogers. Like Linda Price, the young woman lay dead in the bathtub, stabbed in the back, chest, and wrist. There was no ID of the woman in the room, but investigators noted a tattoo of a cross on her shoulder. Her jeans and shoes were piled near the toilet. A bracelet was found in the sink. From the evidence left behind, Tampa homicide detective Julie Masucci attempted to piece together the details of the murder.
When we removed the clothing, it appeared that she had been stabbed through the clothing, which means that she was never undressed. And it was from the rear portion, which appeared that someone might have come up behind her and stabbed her.
The shoes had blood spots on the top, indicating she had them on and was standing when she was attacked. Under her body was a man's watch. Investigators believed it belonged to the killer.
It was significant that she was placed in a bathtub and that it appeared that someone tried to clean up any evidence that they left behind. We had found towels to indicate someone had wiped up blood off of a floor. It appeared that the bathtub water had been run to try and clean up any evidence that was left behind.
The detective interviewed the housekeeper who discovered the body. That morning, she had been making her daily rounds just after checkout time. Outside room 119, she spotted a handwritten "Do Not Disturb" sign.
Housekeeping!
She said she didn't clean the room the day before because she saw the sign and wanted to respect the privacy of the people staying there. On this day, the occupants were scheduled to have checked out. When she entered the bathroom, she made the gruesome discovery. Detectives asked the motel manager if she knew about the people staying in room 119. She recalled the man who rented the room because he requested a "Do Not Disturb" sign the day before.
They told him he didn't have one. So he paid for another night and told them at the registration that he did not want them cleaning his room. He wanted it to be left alone. Apparently he went back to the room and tore off a piece of a phone book and made his own "Do Not Disturb" sign, and he hung it on the door.
The motel manager remembered the same man packing up a small white car that evening. He had paid for another night, so she didn't think he was leaving. She warned him about recent break-ins at the motel and told him not to leave anything in the car overnight.
Thanks. Good, I'll go.
The detectives checked the office records, finding the registration card for room 119. It had Glenn Rogers' name and signature on it. Technicians would later recover prints matching Rogers from the card. Detective Masucci ran a computer check and saw the California and Mississippi murder warrants. She contacted the other agencies and the FBI.
Then we started to realize very quickly into the investigation that there was a possibility that this man, Mr. Glenn Rogers, was a serial killer.
The investigators knew who the killer was, but Tampa detectives still had not identified the female victim. She remained at the morgue as Jane Doe. If they could identify her, it might help them find the man who had killed her and at least 2 others. In the fall of 1995, after linking murders in California, Mississippi, and Florida to one man, the FBI and local detectives searched for accused serial killer Glenn Rogers. The latest victim had been found in a Tampa motel room. She was still unidentified. Responding to media coverage, a woman whose daughter had been missing for 2 days came forward. She positively identified the body of her daughter, Tina Marie Cribbs. Tina had 2 children of her own. Tina's mother told Detective Julie Masucci about her daughter's last day.
We learned that Tina had worked and that she went to the Showtime bar, which is in Gibsonton, and she met some friends there. She was supposed to meet her mother there. Apparently it's like a family bar where a lot of people go, and there's televisions in there, and they just go and gather and talk.
Detectives visited the Showtime bar. The bartender said she knew Tina and her mother. She confirmed that Tina had been in the bar on November 5th. The bartender also remembered that a man named Glenn was there the same night.
How you nice ladies doing?
He talked with Tina and the
Let me
others.
do it for you, let the good times roll. You want bartender?
He bought a round of drinks with a $100 bill. The bartender said the man was very friendly and won Tina over quickly.
She started talking to a gentleman that was...
Eventually, he asked Tina for a ride home. He said his motel room was close and promised Tina would be back in time to meet her mother.
Everything's taken care of, right? All right, very good, thanks.
Tina finally agreed and told the others she'd be right back.
When the mother came to the Showtime bar, she sat there and waited, and her daughter didn't show up. So she said she started beeping her to find out where she was. And she said that she had such a close-knit relationship with her daughter that she immediately knew something was wrong when she didn't answer her pages.
Detective Masucci also learned that Tina owned a white Ford Festiva, the same kind of car the Tampa motel manager had seen Rogers packing with suitcases. She updated the NCIC report on Rogers, adding the Festiva and its license plate number to the fugitive's information. FBI Special Agent John Huber was surprised that Rogers wasn't trying to conceal himself.
Glenn Rogers seemed to not care if he would get caught or had no fear of the law. He would always use his real name when dealing with people and checking into motels. He would drive cars that weren't stolen, either belonged to the victim, which he could easily be linked to, or his own vehicle. He didn't seem to care. If people knew what was happening, he wasn't trying to hide.
The search for the serial killer hit the news. TV stations across the Southeast broadcast pictures of Rogers, asking anyone spotting him to call authorities. Hundreds of leads poured into the FBI. One promising tip came from a Jackson, Mississippi motel. 2 separate callers claimed to have seen Rogers there. Rogers had been in Jackson previously and was known to frequent small motels.
We set up a perimeter around the hotel, and then we had an entry team go up to the door.
Police, come to the door! Come to the door with your hands up! Come to the door! Hands where we can see them! Take your hands off!
Agents were cautious until they could identify the man.
Put that on the wall! Where is it? Hands on the wall.
We identified the person that resembled Rogers and determined that it was not him. We then later searched the entire hotel and began searching the hotels in the immediate vicinity, but didn't find him. It was very important in this case to apprehend this individual as soon as possible, because based on his history, he was going to continue to kill until he was apprehended.
Authorities were desperate to stop him. The serial killer was out there somewhere, and it was likely that he was searching for his next victim. In the fall of 1995, suspected serial killer Glenn Rogers had been last seen in Florida. The FBI believed he had murdered a woman there after killing women in California and Mississippi. The FBI soon learned that Louisiana had been his next stop. On November 10, 1995, Andy Sutton, a mother of 4, was found murdered in her Bossier City, Louisiana apartment.
Bruises on her legs.
Like 2 others, she had multiple stab wounds to her upper body and back.
So,
The Bossier City detective questioned the victim's roommate and former boyfriend.
9 o'clock.
was anyone present?
Andy's roommate was a waitress and had worked late the night before Andy was killed.
Went in together.
When she returned home in the early morning hours, she heard the bedroom door close. She assumed it was Andy and her new boyfriend, Glenn Rogers, in the apartment's 1-bedroom. Blankets had been left on the couch, and so she slept there. After daybreak, she was awakened by someone at the apartment door.
Would you tell Andy I'm here?
It was Andy's ex-boyfriend.
No, that's all right. I'm here now. I'd like to see Andy.
He wanted to talk to Andy.
I don't care. I'd still like to see him.
Stay there. Andy? Andy?
In the room, she found Andy's body under the sheet. She told detectives Andy had met Glenn Rogers in a bar. They had been dating for only a few days. Neighbors had seen Rogers leave in a white Festiva. Bossier City detectives ran Rogers' name through the NCIC and saw the 3 other murder warrants. They contacted the other police agencies and the FBI.
Hey, detective. Here's that fax record.
Los Angeles faxed a photo of Rogers to be used in the local investigation. Louisiana television stations picked up the story. Viewers were asked to be on the lookout for Rogers, but they were warned not to approach the deadly fugitive. Special Agent John Huber and the other investigators were frustrated.
Yeah, you know it.
Rogers was killing people faster than we could investigate where he was. It was just a kind of a time game, and he was killing people faster than we could apprehend him.
Hey guys, look at
The FBI and local detectives believed Rogers murdered 4 women in 6 weeks. After each killing, Rogers had fled the state.
Let's try to focus.
The locations he chose were random.
Let's try to focus in. Let's try to focus in over here.
Despite their best efforts, investigators couldn't keep up. They needed to spread the description of Rogers and his vehicle across the country.
Let's start off with that.
Agents sent requests to truckers over their CBs to be on the lookout for a white Ford Festiva. They posted wanted flyers in truck stops and rest areas.
We're not really sure where he's going to be going next. That's why
They held press
below here is
conferences to get
photograph
Rogers' photo out to the public.
And Gallagher passed some of this out.
They wanted to warn
Right now,
potential
what we do know
victims
is,
and hoped someone would spot the killer.
We have already.
Through the media, agents released details of Rogers' MO for finding victims and the route he traveled. The FBI began the process of adding Rogers to their 10 most wanted list.
1996. At the rear of a complex. Getting someone on the 10 most wanted list increases the amount of resources that the Bureau puts into a case. It also increases the amount of media attention that's also worked into a case.
The tips began to increase. One caller claimed Glenn Rogers was at a pool hall in Mississippi. 2 agents responded. One of the pitfalls of an intense media campaign are the many false sightings that well-intentioned citizens call in. The man in the bar was obviously not Rogers. The investigators tried to predict Rogers' next move and focus their search. Special Agent Huber had worked plenty of fugitive cases.
A lot of times in fugitive investigations, when people are in trouble, they'll go to areas that they're familiar with, or associates or friends. In this particular case, Rogers' family and friends were mostly located in the Kentucky area, and that's where a lot of our resources were focused.
Authorities in Kentucky received priority teletypes about the fugitive. Kentucky State Police Detective Bob Stevens was already familiar with the name Glenn Rogers. In fact, he'd been looking for him for almost 2 years. Rogers was wanted for questioning in the disappearance and possible murder of his housemate, 71-year-old Mark Peters. Almost 2 years before Glenn Rogers' cross-country crime spree began, his brother had called the Kentucky State Police.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here.
The body had been found inside his family's cabin. Police believed it was Mark Peters. Peters had last been seen with Rogers. The cord tied around the corpse's hands and feet matched one found in the home the men shared. Authorities could not determine the cause of death, and they couldn't find Rogers.
1029 on it, please. The case is still ongoing and still pending. We had one suspect, which was Glenn Rogers. We weren't able to track Rogers real well due to the fact that he traveled by Greyhound bus, by tractor trailer, cars. It was hard for us to track him. So we had a hard time trying to know where his next step was.
Still, the investigative focus in Kentucky paid off. On November 13th, 1995, Glenn Rogers visited one of his relatives in Lee County, Kentucky. When he left, she called the Kentucky State Police.
Hi, I think you're looking for my nephew. Glenn Rogers.
She said he was driving a small white car heading west toward Interstate 75. When Detective Stevens heard that Rogers was sighted nearby, he set up on the road he believed Rogers would take to I-75. It wasn't long before a white Ford Festiva drove by. The detective began following.
I wanted to make sure that this was Glenn Rogers, not somebody else that I had actually followed in behind. So I pulled out behind this car. When I ran the car tags actually came back stolen. So I began to follow him. I was able to pull up beside him like I was going to pass him. When I looked over, I could see who it was, and the picture I had of Glenn Rogers matched the driver.
The detective requested backup. A local police officer was parked nearby. He joined the slow pursuit. They followed Rogers for a distance.
I think he was kind of watching me, and I was watching him. And I think by then he must have pretty much figured out that he had a police officer behind him. So we pulled up to a stoplight, and he ran the stoplight and pretty much ran some people off the road as he was going through the stoplight. I fell in behind him at that time and activated my emergency equipment.
Rogers didn't stop. He sped up.
He's on to us now. Stand by.
Several miles ahead, police set up a roadblock and tried to clear the road of traffic. They hoped this would be the last stop for the elusive killer. On November 13th, 1995, Kentucky State Police set up a roadblock in an effort to apprehend suspected serial killer Glenn Rogers. Armed officers waited at the roadblock.
Shoot his tire! Shoot his tire!
They fired at his tires, but they didn't stop the killer. Detective Bob Stevens was close behind.
We followed him down the road. He had run several cars off the highway, ran a school bus off the highway. He was driving on the wrong side of the highway. And so it was determined that he had to be stopped. Sergeant Barnes was able to get up the other side of him, and when he came back, he tapped him, spun him out of the highway, off the highway into a ditch.
They didn't know if the fugitive was armed.
When I first approached the car, and I was one of the first ones to approach the car, you could see that he looked very upset, very aggravated that he was in the custody. He was very defiant and just didn't want to be taken into custody at that time.
After a 2-month killing spree that spanned the country and left 4 women dead, Glenn Rogers was finally in custody. The vehicle identification number of the white Festiva confirmed the car belonged to Tina Marie Cribbs, the victim in Florida. Technicians scoured the car for evidence. They found shorts with blood on them, a blanket, and a woman's purse. These and other items linked Rogers to the murders in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Florida.
Tell me a little bit about what you guys have.
The FBI served as the clearinghouse for the evidence. FBI agents and detectives from 5 states met in Kentucky to outline the case. Special Agent John Huber helped plan the meeting.
What they did do was put together all the information that everyone had, share information, and also that the FBI laboratory would process all the evidence in this case so that one agency would have custody of all the evidence and do the analysis.
Agents and detectives agreed that their best case against Rogers was in Florida. Tampa detective Julie Masucci met with detectives and prosecutors to review the evidence. They believe the watch found in the tub with the victim belonged to Rogers. A photograph of Rogers with Mississippi victim Linda Price revealed he wore that type of watch. Detective Masucci was confident in her case due to the physical evidence implicating Rogers.
We had Tina Cribbs' car that he was apprehended in. We had some shorts that belonged to him that had some of Tina Cribbs' DNA on them. the registration slip that Mr. Rogers signed himself, fingerprints that were found inside of motel room number 119, where the victim was found, and miscellaneous items that were found inside of the car when he was apprehended.
On July 11th, 1997, almost 2 years after the murder of Tina Marie Cribbs in a Tampa motel room, Glenn Rogers was convicted of first-degree murder and later sentenced to death in Florida. 2 years later, Rogers was extradited to Los Angeles to stand trial for the strangulation death of Sandra Gallagher, whose body was burned in a truck fire.
She poured over the victim's body and in the cab of the truck. He was seen.
Prosecutors outlined the victim's final hours for the jury. They showed that Sandra and Glenn Rogers left McRed's bar together on September 28, 1995. At some point, there was a struggle, perhaps as Rogers made an unwanted sexual advance. He strangled her, crushing her windpipe. Attempting to destroy evidence, Rogers doused Sandra's body in the truck with gasoline and set it ablaze. Then he ran. On July 16, 1999, a jury again found Glenn Rogers guilty of murder. He was sentenced to a second death penalty in the state of California. Los Angeles detective Mike Koblenz was impressed by the nationwide partnership of everyone involved in the hunt for Rogers.
That's really what made this case come together, was the interagency cooperation, and not just in Los Angeles, but in Jackson, Mississippi, Tampa, Florida, and later Bossier City, Louisiana, the FBI, the press, the different news agencies that were able to get the information out. We truly worked together on this, and it came to a successful conclusion down the road.
Since Glenn Rogers already had 2 death sentences, Louisiana and Mississippi prosecutors decided to spare the families of the victims emotional trials. Glenn Rogers left at least 11 children without mothers. The importance of stopping him was clear to Detective Julie Masucci and the other investigators.
As a woman, not as a detective, not as a police officer, but as a female, I think that there should be a lot of women that feel safe that he's off of the streets. He had no regard for human life. He had no regard for the feelings of the families that are left behind. He didn't care. And I'm happy that he's behind bars. And I'm happy that he'll never step foot outside of a prison system that he could put other females at risk.
Investigators suspect Rogers is responsible for more unsolved murders. He told family members during his rampage that he had killed dozens. Authorities continue to pursue those unsolved murders to close the cases that can be linked to Glenn Rogers.